Well, good morning. I'm Carrie Slavens. I'm the Director of Public Relations with South Island Prosperity Partnership. We are the region's Economic Development Alliance, and I'll be your host for this morning. I want to welcome you to our first Ideas and Impact session of 2022. We had a successful run last year, and we're really thrilled to open this up again. For the next hour, we're going to explore the burning question, are we being priced out of our cities? It's a key question here, of course, in Greater Victoria, one of the most expensive city regions in this country. And it's an important question for Canada, where 80% of our population lives in cities. But before we delve into this important topic, I want to introduce you to Colin Doylan, CEO of Habitat for Humanity. Habitat for Humanity is the newest member of South Island Prosperity Partnership, and Colin is going to introduce you to our two panelists today. Hi, Colin.
Hello, good morning. Thank you very much, Carrie. We are here to talk about a subject near and dear to my heart and our team at Habitat Victoria. We all know affordable homes provide a strong foundation on which families can build their future. And at Habitat here at Victoria, we are set to make the most significant investment in affordable home ownership in the CRD's history. So as such, it is my pleasure to introduce you to two people who have spent their careers thinking and acting on initiatives to make our cities and communities more diverse, vibrant, and equitable places. Mary Rowe, she is the president of the Canadian Urban Institute and is a leading urban advocate and civil society trailblazer. Mary was president of the Ideas That Matter, a platform based on the work of renowned urbanist Jane Jacobs, amazing lady, to stimulate discussion around cities. And in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, she worked in New Orleans to support rebuilding through micro investments in neighborhood projects. Under Mary's leadership, CUI have expanded to include international network from government, industry, community, and city building professions to collaborate on solutions to some of the greatest urban challenges. Mary is a senior fellow with Shorefast and a national charity focused on building community economies. Zita Cobb, as luck would have it, caught up with Mary on her cross Canada tour and Mary caught up with her as a panelist with Zita. Zita is the founder of and CEO of Shorefast. Zita grew up on the remote Newfoundland fishing community of Fogo Island and made her way onto the heights, into the heights of the tech industry, JDS Fidel, which she helped build into one of the most successful tech innovators in history. She returned home to Fogo Island in the early 2000s to co-found Shorefast. Many of you caught Zita's interview on 60 Minutes on CBS in December as she talked about bringing new life to the remote Newfoundland fishing community on Fogo Island, home to the world famous Fogo Island Inn. This is a spectacular inn, which was recently named to the New York Times 2022 list of the 52 places for a changed world, which highlights places around the globe where travelers can be part of the solution. Today, a big part of Zita's focus is on the Pan-Canadian Shorefast Community Economies Pilot, which aims to answer, how do we strengthen community economies? And now I'll turn it back over to our moderator, Carrie. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Colin. And Colin, we're going to ask you to hang around for the discussion as well. So hopefully, yeah. Are you good with that? Are we all good with that? Yeah, we'll have a local voice here. Well, the Canadian Real Estate Association recently reported the average price of the Canadian house has hit $816,000+. That's up 20% in the past year and the highest level on record. Many things have preceded this sky-high housing, of course: pandemic, low mortgage rates, high demand, restricted supply. And it's not just buyers. Rents are also soaring in cities, and rents make up about 30% of the market. Many experts say the issue of housing costs has become one of acute housing inequality, and an entire generation is at risk of being left behind. Mary, I'm going to start with you. How is this changing the makeup of cities, this price crunch that we're in? Is it something that is fairly unique to us in our times? I mean, I can think back to the Industrial Revolution. Well, I can't think back, but I've read back to the Industrial Revolution when people came to the cities for jobs and we're in a housing crunch. But what are you witnessing out there? And what's going on? How is this changing our cities?
Well, first of all, it's really great to be here, and I'm appreciative of the leadership of the South Island Prosperity Partnership, because I think you're demonstrating the kind of collective approach that we need communities across the country to be taking, that bring together the diverse stakeholders that you guys are engaging with, so that, because cities are a complicated thing and the economy is a complicated thing. Zita will attest to that when it's her turn to sort of tell you where she's coming from. But and so these kinds of collaborations that you're creating through SIP is really critical. And I appreciate, nice to see you guys again, Carrie. Thanks for asking us on.
Yeah.
And for all the work that your colleagues at SIP are doing. But first of all, cities are complicated and they've never been cheap, ever. And cities are a repository for extremes. So, and that's always been the case. So when you have an agglomeration of people and they come together primarily around an economy, that's what a city is. It's people coming to trade and exchange. The economy is the heart of the city. And you naturally then find that the system sorts itself in such a way that you have highly affluent, successful people, successful in certain metrics, who can accumulate wealth. And then you have people who aren't part of that or who are at the lower end of that scale. And you see, and what we continue to see in urbanization around the world is a kind of increasing polarization, because the system of a city and the system of an economy requires people to be engaging at all different scales and levels. And that does mean that you'll always have low income employment in cities that fuel the engine of the economy that drives the country. So I just want to say that it's never been easy and it's never been simple. A simple city is a really boring place, and there aren't very many of them that are simple. So in terms of this particular moment that we're in, it's interesting. Zita and I last evening, I was saying, when have we had could we think of another time where some challenge becomes so much part of the common parlance that it's like a meme? Oh, it's a this, and we were having trouble. Maybe Zita overnight thought of one, but I feel like housing has become the post-COVID kind of magnet for everything that's wrong, and that we use housing now as this proxy for people aren't getting what they need. It's not equal. It's not fair. The market is dominating. So it's becoming our latest fixation about things that are dysfunctional. And that is a cultural kind of ingrown kind of thing that we want to reject something. And so we choose it. So that's just as more of a disclaimer. This is my favorite phrase. This is a Gordian knot. It's a whole bunch of factors, whole bunch of things confluence that are conflating and moving together to make this complicated. Usually people, when they confront a Gordian knot, they say, oh, it's a systems challenge. This drives me fairly nuts, because I feel like a systems challenge diagnosis is the biggest conversation killer. Like, okay, well, fine. What the hell do we do about a systems challenge? But I think the answer probably is there's no silver bullet. And you've got demography, and you've got climate, and you've got a changing global economy through digitization. And then you've got market forces, money, which is what Zita is going to talk about, how money moves, how money is really unfettered in so many ways. And then you've got some it's hard to imagine in Canada because we're a vast geography, but you've got some limitations, you've got some constraints, largely around land. Mm-hmm. And so all of that, as I say, is a big honkin' confluence that's bringing us to this point. And I don't think it's going to be one thing or t'other that's going to solve it. But what I would say, and where Zita and I have an animated conversation on this, is I think we do, as a collective, need to be thinking thoughtfully about where is our most effective intervention point. And that's what you're seeing government struggling with. CUI has been working with CMHC and with the FCM to look at the Housing Accelerator Fund, which the Liberals put in their platform, and they're committing to put $5 billion in to try to accelerate housing supply. And we've been talking with stakeholders and city staff across the country about this. And what we realized there is that you do have to you have to be strategic about what interventions can help the system help itself. Mm-hmm. And you can do a lot of harm by doing the wrong thing. And then it's challenging to figure out what the right thing is. So just to sum up, I would say this. I think the situation we're in now is, as I suggested, it's kind of an amalgam of a whole bunch of things. But I would say when we look at intervention points, we need to look at rules. We need to look at money. Mm-hmm. We need to look at land. And then we need to look at choices. Cities are fundamentally about choice and diversity. That's what makes a city fantastic. No two things the same, lots of options, lots of choices, how you work, how you live, how you get around, how you function. And whenever you want to increase the complexity of a system, you want to increase the efficiency of a system, you want to look at the diversities that exist and figure out what are the connections you need to make the system work even more efficiently and more productively. And that means choices, upping choices. And I think the big fundamental thing we have in housing is that over 50 years, it was unclear what the public role should be. And the market took a particular direction and had some encouragement by various instruments. Zita will speak more about this. Various encouragements that took it down a path which actually has made the funnel much narrower. And we haven't seen the range of choice that we need to see in the housing sector. And so Colin will have something to say about that too. So there you go. That's my best shot, Carrie. Not very concise.
Okay, well, that's great. And Zita, I want to move it over to you. So Zita, you actually grew up in the Fogo Islands off the coast of Newfoundland. So you've experienced the most extreme of small town, small community living. And you've experienced, of course, living in, working in the tech sector in big cities. So I'd like your take on this. Given your experience, what are you seeing out there right now in terms of why the changing makeup of cities, the impact of this, I don't know, price wars, price crisis?
I think, well, Carrie, nice to be here and to be in this conversation. And I want to start by saying that I think we've created sort of a false tension or a false dichotomy between urban and rural. Because from a solution point of view, yes, the scale is different, but we need to be thinking about systems and reshaping a system that works at different scales. We didn't get to be 38 million people, however many, I think that's how many we are now as Canada, by, in one gestalt moment of 38 million people. I remember when the infrastructure fund was being launched, the Canadian Infrastructure Fund, I think it was Dominic Barton who said, fewer, bigger is better than many. We are 5,162 communities that are incorporated in our country. I don't think the people who live in Toronto want us all coming to Toronto, or you don't want us all coming to Victoria. And we live in a time of network computing, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit, and a money system that it can go anywhere it wants, pretty much. We're on a path of seeing serious disinvestment in communities outside of the urban areas, which is, of course, compounding the problems in bigger places. But it's all one. This is the thing. And I mean, the fundamental question is, how do the parts belong to the whole? How do communities belong to a greater whole called Canada, or a whole called British Columbia, or Newfoundland and Labrador? And the systems we need, the money systems we need to start with, we had to grow the plumbing for money to flow, and we don't have that plumbing. And I mean, I think at the grandest scale of this question of, I think you asked it as a question, are we being priced out of our cities? I don't think it's a question. I mean, it's a fact. So I don't think a question mark's really needed. It is, I think at the highest level, it reflects the disproportionate growth of the financial economy compared to what some people will call the real economy, but let me be nice and we'll call it the non-financial economy. And they're in conflict. And when you think about housing, it has three functions. It has the function of shelter. It has a function of expression or manifestation of culture. That's a part of how we express who we are. And then it's a store of wealth. Mm-hmm. And because the financial economy has gotten ahead of us, this is a natural outcome. And when we think about how do we tackle this, it obviously comes to the local, because we all are embodied creatures that are going to put our heads down somewhere. Every single national priority or global priority has to have solutions developed in each local place. And that I want to agree with Mary, that I think organizations like SIP, where we have a collective action problem generally as human beings, and figuring out these platforms for how we come together, especially in local. I think housing solutions need to respond, and this is where Mary and I might fight. They need to respond to integrated plans for community development.
Okay.
That's at the local level. So I think it needs to be locally led, and provinces and the nation that need to respond to that. And why can't we make something that's dynamically reconfigurable that will work just as well on Fogo Island, where we have a housing problem too, as it would in Victoria?
Okay, interesting, because I did wonder about Fogo Island. What is the current housing situation there?
Well, we're again, these things exist at different scales.
Yeah.
And so the situation on Fogo Island is we are being starved for investment capital.
Okay.
Money does not flow to the far reaches of our geography called Canada. Compared to almost any other country on earth, our banking system is, highly concentrated and has, generally speaking, disinvested out of the further reaches.
Mhm.
And so, if you want to buy a house on Fogo Island, well, you'll have two problems. Your first problem is you won't get a mortgage, most likely. And the way that banks that are in the big centers look at rural areas, they give them a big haircut and say it's not worth as much, and so we're not going to lend you as much.
Mhm.
And secondly, we have aging homes. I mean, like I live in a house that was, built in the 1800s that we got electricity in the 70s. So we're not at the kind of level of quality of housing. Many of our communities on the island don't have running water. They live on wells that are, so, we're at a very different kind of a place. And so it's not the kind of place that money rushes in. So we're trying to build receptive plumbing for money to come in. Because when I think about 5,162 communities, I don't think about 5,162 places of need. I think it's 5,162 fantastic opportunities if we can get financial capital to get under the inherent assets of our country. And that's so important to how we develop our internal economy. We have a tyranny of assets. We just haven't lined up the money system to get beneath them.
Okay, you raised a lot of good points, many that I want to come back to. We have a local housing, I don't know if I call her an advocate, Nicole Chelan. And I remember hearing her talk a couple of years ago, and she said, she raised the question, at what point did a house stop being a home and become an ATM? Is that, and Colin, please jump in on this as well. Is that a big part of our problem too now? Is that we are considering our homes as investments, and we are not looking at them so much as our domiciles, our places of haven, sanctuary, necessary for raising families. Do you guys want to weigh in on that?
Zita, do you want to start?
Well, I mean, this is exactly part of the problem, because it is a store of value, and increasingly so, especially, and the more the financial economy grows, this problem is going to get worse before it ever gets better. I mean, it won't get better by itself. There need to be interventions of many kinds. And I always love the quote by Stanislav Lech, who said, "Every snowflake in an avalanche pleads not guilty." And there are a lot of snowflakes in this avalanche. And existing homeowners are part of our snowflakes in this avalanche too. And who doesn't want to protect the value they have in their homes? And who doesn't want to continue going up? Yet we all lament. So it is a super complicated thing. But the fact that a home is a store of value, if we decided we wanted to change that a little bit, we have tax policy, which would change that. But we have to have grown-up conversations about that.
Good point. Colin, you've been there patiently. Do you want to weigh in on that question and your perspectives on where we are with housing and cities and the whole complicated Gordian knot?
Yeah, definitely. It is all about having those grown-up conversations, and it is about tax policy. It's about incentivizing homeowners to build more homes, developers to build more homes that are affordable within that, not just the high-end profiteering aspect of things, where the average price of a home in the CRD is what, 1.2 million now. We have to provide a different type of housing, and not just affordable rental housing, but in that housing continuum, looking at affordable home ownership, and to move through that process. and to provide those resources. So if we can build more homes, we can get government to put the programs together to open that up and not constrict it. And I think the province of BC has put municipalities on notice that they're going to be moving forward on some policies moving forward if they don't see municipalities advancing the build out of the supply. And you know, municipalities exist at the pleasure of the province of the province. So hopefully that incentivizes communities to really put some sustainable solutions in at all sectors in all regions, including urban and rural. But I think we need to put some greater incentives to unleash the capital for rural communities as well. And I think they need to pay particular attention to that, because that is it's the traditional hinterland versus the heartland argument. And I think, you know, that you learn that in school, and I think we forget that when we leave.
Okay.
So, Carrie, that's my cue. Can I jump in?
Yes, please.
Colin saying that the cities exist at the pleasure of provincial governments. Boy, I bet not a single provincial government thinks that cities are their pleasure. Just saying. But I know what you're getting at. You're saying that they're creatures of the province, which is the trope we continue to reinforce in Canada, which is a fundamental challenge. It disempowers municipal government from actually being able to do the things it probably should be doing to fix. And not only does it disempower them, it sometimes lets them off the hook, so that you can't actually hold your local councillor accountable, because they don't have the levers or the resources to actually fix things. And the thing about housing for me that's so frustrating is that every order of government blames the other one. It's kind of like a head-banging exercise that they do this when you try to hold anybody accountable. I just want a couple things on the when did a house not stopping a home? You know, I feel, and actually, Colin, I want to take you to task on this, because I think Habitat for Humanity, I know you've shifted and I appreciate the shift, but Habitat for Humanity in many ways bought in to a kind of notion, a kind of idealized, romanticized notion that the way that you move up in society, or the way that you establish yourself, we sort of copied from the American model and said the Canadian dream means you have to own a home. And I think this is that sad path we took, because it's put us into a place where people have fixated that if they or their children can't purchase and own a home, we've privileged that. And in fact, there's nothing wrong with being a lifelong tenant. Tenants can be fabulous neighbors, or communities where people are renters are fabulous communities. And we have continued in very subtle ways to perpetuate a kind of second class, third class approach to that. Whereas in other cultures, there's no expectation that you own your home, and you actually are living in a particular environment, and you steward those resources the way you would if there was regardless of the nature of your tenure. So I just want to say I realize that's a pushing water uphill argument, because people have a kind of romantic attachment to owning a home, and they also sadly have a particular perception that home has to have a lawn and it has to be at ground level. The other thing I would say is the other side of it is the financial security side. Yes, your home is an ATM, but your home is also probably your RRSP. And that would be true for me. For instance, my wealth, any wealth that I ever have, is going to accrue in my home that I live in. And so I can choose to use it as an ATM. I can also choose to say I'm going to keep it for 10, 15 more years, and then I'm going to cash it and retire on the income there. And I think we've had this challenge for 30 years in Canada, where we haven't had creative options being put in front of people to say, you don't actually have to own. Here are other vehicles for you to build equity. Here are other mechanisms for you, because it's a kind of an enforced savings. But when you really do the math, you know, owning a home is much more costly than actually if you rented and you took that money and you socked it into some other vehicle. So I think there's a very micro, hyper personal challenge around how we've organized our way of understanding how we are secure in the world, how we build neighborhoods, and then how do we sort of provide for our own security. So I just want to say that those are two very strong cultural things. Then if you add on to it what Zita's talking about, the financialization of housing, the fact that private equity and all sorts of investor money is flooding into that system, pushing the market in a particular direction. So I don't think this is simple. I want to go back to key interventions.
Okay.
Canada the federal government got out of the housing business in the 70s, and we've never really recovered. It built social housing. It invested it put public resources in the hands, and then it engaged the development sector to create, and we had these different kinds of mechanisms and government mechanisms. And then somewhere in the 70s and 80s, they decided to get out of that business. And now it's really hard to get back in. And I think that the affordable housing advocates on the line are going to echo that this is one of the challenges, is that the market by itself is not going to be able to generate the range of the continuum, the housing continuum. And so every municipal government in this country, just as Zita said, all 5,000 of them are struggling with how do they address a very particular supply gap, which is for people who are low and moderate income. And how are they going to actually, what are the instruments available to them? So I think one of the critical things here is land. We need to look at how we use public land. Governments own enormous amounts of land in cities, federal, provincial, and municipal governments. And that land has this perverse constraint around it, which is that a government can't dispose of that land below highest and best use, or what's the language, Colin? Market use or something. There's some term that governments have adopted. And Zita, you may understand it because it's a balance sheet consideration. People are also saying to us that the governments could actually write that off, absorb that. They could either hang on to the asset and give a 99-year lease, and so that would stay on their books, or they could find another way to offload those assets, and then Colin's constituency, the not-for-profit housing sector, could take those lands and make them available for multi-unit affordable units for the sector of the population that the market's never going to serve. And I think that's where I'm at. What are the intervention points? What do we think the 2 or 3 key things would be that governments at each order could intervene in concert with each other and make the kind of nudging that we need to have happen?
I think you raise a very interesting point there. And in researching before my interview here, I was looking at, well, I have a friend from Paris who says, why are you in North America so obsessed with owning your own home? Few of us own our own homes here. Vienna, by some estimates, and Mary, you'd know better than me, is 40% subsidized housing. And it's the government working with the private sector, and then there's an oversight to that. And I know Europe is having its own housing crunch right now, but it is very interesting that we have become obsessed or sold with home ownership here. We feel it's a right, I think, and it is almost a bit of a caste system in some ways. What do you do for a living? Do you own your own home? That's what's being asked. So there's probably some mind changing around that. But in the meantime, what about co-op housing? That hasn't really been explored by the federal government since the 70s and 80s, and then it just kind of dribbled down. And it seemed to be for a long time a very effective way of getting people.
There are people in your chat, including the loquacious and eloquent always Alison Ashcroft, raising issues around tenure. That's exactly right, Carrie. Like, we need a whole mix of solutions. We need to be much more open to co-ops, co-housing, mixed unit. To the comment about, you don't want to concentrate just one kind of income type of house in one neighborhood. Absolutely not. You want to have, any ecosystem to be really diverse, to be really healthy, is diverse, to resilient. So you want to have a whole mix of tenure, and we should be experimenting. And I will say that I think Victoria as a jurisdiction is highly experimental. You walk these residential streets here and you see single family, multi-unit, co-op, different kind of arrangement, co-housing. We were on the weekend in the company of folks who were looking at creating a series of kind of interlinked units, rental units that have a sort of some shared services and amenities. This is where we have to get creative. And that's where Europeans have been forever, is much more creative. I don't quite know. And I wonder, Colin, what you think about what the government's disposition, I mean, primarily the federal government's disposition, would be to actually getting back into operating housing. And I don't know what you would think about that, if they actually built it and committed to operating it, because that is one of the big challenges, is that in the private equity piece, and maybe I should just pass to Zita, is that the problem with investors is they get in, make some dough, and they get out. And it's antithetical to the kind of commitment and stewardship that we need to be cultivating in the housing sector.
Okay, yeah, Zita, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think when you ask about co-op as a different kind of ownership model, it takes me back to when Bruce Flatt, who is the CEO of Brookfield, said at one of the Davos gatherings, I wasn't at Davos, just to be clear, I watched the interviews, and when being asked about, what's the future of the the price of Brookfield stock, very important question, especially if you have a pension fund that holds it. He said, oh, it's a bright future because nobody cares who owns real estate. And I was really struck by this, and I thought, really? Does no one care? I mean, maybe we didn't care, but we should care, because different ownership models and different owners are going to behave differently. And in particular, they have different time horizons, as Mary said. So if what you have are financial investors that own everything we live in, that's a certain, I mean, we're living in a country where the vast majority of rental housing in the Canadian North was owned by a REIT, and I think is now owned by somebody else in Toronto. So really—
1 second, Zita, for those of you who don't know, a REIT is a real estate investment trust.
That's it.
Real estate investment trust. Okay, go for
The
it.
key word there is investment. So I think it does matter who owns what. And I think the closer to the ground we live on, the owners are, the better we're going to be in actually planning with different time horizons that have some continuity and some reinvestment. Because I think the other thing that happens is then, depending on who owns it, you start to get flip, and every time we flip, all the intermediaries have to take their pound of flesh out of it. So that's got to be paid for. That's got to come out of the rent. That's got to come out of something. I mean, I'm with Mary. I think we are over-focused on ownership. Now, in a place like Fogo Island, there are no rental buildings, or maybe one. I mean, I don't even know if that counts as a rental building. It's just not the way our history has emerged. But I think as our economy is growing, we do need them now. We absolutely need them. But every vehicle in the country, starting with the infrastructure bank and all the way through, all the scales are too big for the size of our little problem. A tiny amount of money can go a long way in a small place. But I think we have to grow the muscles to be thinking about different kinds of ownership models that are closer to the ground. I think land trusts have a really important future, and because that's the only way we're going to protect from the flip, and every time it flips, the values go up. It's for all of us to come up with different kinds of models. I mean, I think the model of which we see for a lot of rental buildings was, so-called mom and pops building little apartment buildings. That's a beautiful model. Those mom and pops live in the community. It just gets a little bit less beautiful when they get gobbled up. But I think we got to stop waiting for big money to come from far away to own something. Money should come from far away to invest in what we are doing here with a view to owning here, wherever here is.
Okay, that's a great point. Colin, you must want to jump in on this one.
I love hearing the conversation. I'm a renter myself. I was a homeowner. And the key thing for me is affordability. If you're a renter, if you're an owner, whatever it is, that's what allows someone to be successful, not to throw away their money on something on some other market force where it doesn't allow them to get ahead. So whatever tool in the toolbox we can put in place to increase the supply of whatever type of housing fits that community and that demographic that we're trying to serve, that's what we're trying to accomplish. Affordable home ownership is not the be all and end all, but it's an important piece in the continuum to allow people to move through the system and to not just stagnate in something just because they're forced to. We're seeing a lot of that in BC in terms of once you're in affordable housing, you stay in affordable housing or subsidized housing. There's no movement. And so you have to keep creating one solution and you don't move people through. I think we have to be cognizant of that and allow for people to have choices, but not to focus on one thing being the be all and the solution and create that second class. That's not what we're trying to accomplish whatsoever. We're trying to create better futures for families. And that's really, I think, what we're discussing today. And it comes down, you're right, to caring who owns the land, caring who the stewards of those properties are. And there's a lot of lessons we can learn from First Nations communities, because the models that a number of communities have put together really, truly showcase what's possible to build a sustainable community.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
Carrie, I just want to jump in on a few things, if I may. One is what Colin just suggested. We've got it. we need probably better tenant protection. Sue Hallett has raised this question in the chat. The questions, she's saying, yeah, but wait a second, if you've got developers in there who are going to swoop in, or your rents are going to suddenly get jacked up. So you've got to have tenant protection to ensure that renters continue to be to feel like they can invest in their community and that they're not going to be displaced. And one of the challenges we've always had in subsidized public housing is that you move into the community, as you suggest, Colin, you qualify for a subsidy. You then get a different kind of job, or your family grows, and suddenly you have to be pushed out of your neighborhood where you've been there for 5 years and all your neighbors are, and you know where all your shopping is and all that kind of stuff. And suddenly, oh, no, you're no longer eligible. So we've got it's like seniors going into an aging in place facility where they need assisted living and then they need something else. You know, we've got to try to build more diverse mixed neighborhoods so that you can move within your neighborhood. That's true now for people that are overhoused and have 3 empty bedrooms and would love to be able to get rid of their house and give it to a family that's got 7 children, so that people don't have 7 kids anymore, but you know what I mean? And they would take that house, and then that person wants to be able to continue to stay in their neighborhood, and they don't have choices. There aren't mixed units because sadly, neighbors in neighborhoods are very risk averse. They don't want to allow multi-unit. Unlike Victoria, I'm telling you, I want to take pictures of Victoria, show it across the country. Here's what it can look like: single family, multi, and that's a dilemma. We have the reverse of this too, again, because of lack of rental options, where people are being pushed into forced ownership because they can't find a rental unit that will work for their 3 kids. Because we haven't been building multifamily unit rentals because the money hasn't been invested in that way to entice the development sector to build those larger units. And so I've now got 3 kids, and my only choice is to go buy a house, which I might in fact not want to do because I might know that in 2 years I'm going to transfer, or my spouse and I might decide to go do something else. So we're back to what Colin's suggesting about choice. That's why we need a whole menu of different investment vehicles, different kinds of ways to approach this. And then we need flexible rules. And I see we've got municipal councillors on here. And I think Victoria is trying to move on this. Flexible rules that allow us to intensify, alter kinds of configurations on lots so that you have more and more different kinds of options and not just one singular view that this is what a house or a unit needs to look like.
So one thing I want to ask here, I want to interject with Victoria, and thank you for your lovely comments about it. A big ongoing debate, fight, scrap in Victoria is about density. And I'm talking about Greater Victoria. So, I mean, Victoria proper has limited land. And now we're looking at the peninsula where Central Saanich is trying to put in forms of affordable housing. What makes people so upset about density?
Yeah.
And why is it such a dirty word? What are we doing wrong in talking about it? Who wants
I'll
to
let my
take that?
colleagues answer, and then I have an answer, but I want to hear what Colin and Zita think.
Yeah, Colin, go for it. We can't hear you, Colin.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to formulate the right answer right now. And what really comes to my mind though is the one biggest impact we could have in Canada right now is making the donation of land from wealthy landowners 100% charitable, without forcing the actual sale of the land or treating it as a sale, then giving and then having it registered as a charitable donation. I think that will change the game in terms of the opportunities for supply.
Right. Okay.
That's my number one focus right now. I've got a number of people that wish they could donate, but it doesn't make any financial sense for them.
That's great. Zita, anything to add on that one?
Well, I mean, I live on an island that's 4 times the size of Manhattan, with 2,400 people.
Yeah.
So, but yet we do have a density issue because we all live on top of each other because, you know, we're a fishing community. So everybody really, that you can't swing a cat without hitting somebody on that island. And so I think we need to start a different kind of a conversation that Mary would be best place to start, which is to the question of what is wrong with density. We need a little to re-educate ourselves about what actually gives our lives value. Is it that I'm going to protect this distance I have and I want the sun to come straight into my backyard and not be blocked by some other building and whatever? Or is it that actually we have enough density in my neighborhood that I don't have to get in the car to actually go get an apple? And so I think people don't maybe think deeply enough, and we haven't talked enough about what you get, what in terms of a quality of life by increased density.
Mhm.
I mean, rural people will be the first to say, like, you have to have a car, you have to drive in rural Canada. That's the great thing about cities. So it is a mystery to me as more a rural person why city people don't want more density, because
Mhm.
that's the point, isn't it?
Mhm.
So I just can't resist, because our beloved colleague from Esri, Alex Miller, has put into the chat, humans evolved in open spaces and don't do well in dense, unnatural environments. Alex, not that Alex and I haven't had this conversation many times. Alex, we are social beings. Presumably we got together occasionally because we've procreated and created the species that we've got. It's an old trope that we actually, it's an old, deeply embedded anti-urban trope. And it's biblical, really, about the cities being the den of iniquity. So in fact, we're wired for connection. And Zita is identifying it in an interesting way, that in rural communities, people find all sorts of alternate ways of connecting because of the distance and the hardship. They were completely interdependent on one another because they didn't have the shared services right out their front door the way you do if you're in an urban environment. So I think the aversion to density is good old-fashioned xenophobia. Remember that in Canada, tons of urban population are actually immigrants coming who do not look like you and me.
Very interesting.
And we also have, I would say, and I worry about this post-pandemic, we've all been in our little Zoom cocoons. And we actually haven't, I mean, those of us that had the luxury to work from home, remembering the bulk of Canadians didn't and had to still go out to work. And so they've continued to interact. But if you look in an urban environment, one of the ways that it's dependent on functioning is having these opportunities where you encounter the other. Whoever the other is, the other may not look like you, the other may come from a different socioeconomic background, they may be in a different stage of life, in their age, their level of physical ability may be different, all sorts of changes and things that don't mean we're the same. But that's part of the energy and dynamism of urban life, and that's what drives your economy, is exchanges across differences. So I think if we're serious about Canada's future, and if we're serious about the climate challenges that exist, we cannot idealize or pastoralize our future and suggest that we're all going to go back to living in rural environments. That, in fact, isn't sustainable. It's not sustainable environmentally, and it's not sustainable economically, I wouldn't believe, or socially for that matter. But what we want to have is choice, diversity, and be a network of highly local places that have as much capacity and resources as they can to make the quality of life, as you said, Carrie, when you started, livable, affordable, equitable, vibrant city, vibrant community. You want that to be in the hands of local leaders to be able to craft that together. And then you want some connection at all scales so that an urban neighborhood is connected to Oak Bay, is connected to Parkdale, is connected to Fogo Island, that we learn from each other and we have those kinds of collaborative best practices that we share with one another. But it's really got, because I'm a big believer, we've got to have these local solutions. And that means proximity and density have to be part of the solution so that we cobble together a kind of shared life.
Okay, I think that's an amazing point. And Zita, one of the things that struck me is you talk about economic dignity. What is economic dignity?
I think everything starts from economic dignity, meaning that the economy should underpin life. And when people talk about community development, I don't know how to talk about that. I only know how to talk about community economic development. Because if we don't start with that, we're walking on kelp all the time. And so economic dignity, someone's been asking in the chat, and we've used this word and I don't know what it means, but let's put it out there, affordable housing. I mean, first let's start with available housing. I think right at this moment in our history, our Canadian history, we don't have enough housing of any kind. So it's not even available, let alone affordable. And I think wasn't the old measure we used to use that you shouldn't spend more than 30% of your income on housing? I think that was what affordable. So if you were spending more than that, it was not affordable. And for sure, we're in a time, and we are in an inflationary time, and get ready because it's going to get worse. And if the price of housing is climbing faster than income, the affordability part of this is going to get worse. Or are we just going to change our metrics and say, well, it's okay to spend 50% of what you earn on housing? I don't think so. I think that's the path to indignity, because and so it's economic dignity means I have some amount of footing that I can predict. I can plan a little bit my life. I mean, there isn't much that we actually control as humans. A lot of stuff just happens to us. But the stuff that we can control, like our economy, we friggin' well should control. And that's the part it's as if we just let it happen to us. I think we can be more planful. Now, Mary's going to pick on me now, because every time I say planning, she thinks I'm going to, institute some kind of central planning where we're all going to live in some gulag or something. Planning is an act of, it's the act of looking forward and trying to imagine what might happen in an inflationary scenario, and what kind of city does Victoria want to be? What does it look like 50 years? I know you have a plan, and then then take a detailed look at what housing would support that, and what kind of city do we want to be in terms of renters and owners. I mean, but the economic dignity is the ability to plan the rest of your life based on some amount of predictability for a time.
I think that's a really key thing, especially we're living in this age now where people feel they can't predict anything, and there's this panic. And maybe, as Mary, I think you said, this panic is focusing on housing in a big way. I want to move over and just, we've got a lot of questions here. And David has asked, in your opinion, what are 2 or 3, and maybe I'm going to narrow this down to 2 specific policy measures that each level of government can take to address the problem of people being priced out of their cities. So why don't we have a go around? I'll start with you, Colin. What's your top 2 that government at any level or a specific level can do to help people?
The first one is work with organizations that are creating affordable housing, be it rentals or ownership or what have you, and reduce the fees associated to the building out the unit. The other one is allowing existing rental units to strata their buildings so they can provide other alternatives, so they can move people through the system. The other one would be, I'm working on this strategy right now. We have a lot of homes with separated garages. I would love to see some carriage homes on those garages that are separately titled. So they can be rentals or they can be home ownership. It's all about looking at what's available to us. I had a call yesterday with a property owner. It's a private school, and they have a swath of land that's right along a road. It's about 200 feet wide, perfect for doing hopefully a partnership with our team at Habitat. But I could only imagine the conversations we're going to be having with the local government around trying to separate that from existing zoning, and the amount of time that requires, the amount of resources that requires. So streamlining these conversations and thus saving time and money associated to passing that down to the ultimate homeowner or rental property tenant, that I think is really key. People forget about the urgency around the time cost of money as we're trying to create these solutions.
Okay, Mary, you must have something.
I'm very pleased with the level of engagement that you're getting from your audience, and lots of thoughtful people putting stuff into the chat. So I'm reading that as well as listening to Colin and Zita. As of right zoning for density across municipal jurisdictions. And if a municipality won't do what California did, which is say, you've got X number of years, Sacramento, to do this. And if you haven't done it, we're going to do it for you. So that basically you can intensify on a lot. There are various constraints that you have to satisfy. You can't go willy-nilly, but you can move to 40 units as of right. Right now, in many cities across the country, you can go, my neighbor 4 doors down has to go to the committee of adjustment. And I can tell you there'll be 6 neighbors that will object, and it will never happen. And we just have to allow our neighbors to change, folks. All the preservationists on the call, I know that's just causing your hearts to beat a flutter, but come on, we've got to allow neighborhoods to evolve, and we can't hold neighborhoods to be ours. The neighborhood has a future. that requires other people to come in. And I just can't resist not responding to Jacques, who's saying people in France are leaving cities. Jacques, come on. Canada is a newcomer country. We haven't had the level of immigration that we typically see through COVID. That will return, and there will be always people coming to cities to live here. Always. A certain class of people may decide to leave a city, but people that need jobs, people that want to be with their cultural community will continue to populate cities. So the rumor that cities are dying, Mark Twain, is highly exaggerated. People will always come to cities. So I would say as of right zoning, and we need to get brave about that. I think Victoria is considering that, and hurrah for you, you should, and you will lead the country if you're gutsy about this and say that. Second thing, community land trusts. I think we need to have all three orders of government figure out what a community land trust mechanism looks like. And so to deal with the question of affordable, any housing unit is affordable to somebody. What we're talking about is having that range of choice where the market won't supply at the lower income strata, and taking the price of land out and having community stewardship of the trust may in fact give people the assurances that they want, that they won't be, that people won't be taken advantage of, and that there will be the right kinds of guardrails in place so that you could create affordable housing that would maintain and stay affordable. And then the third thing, and Zita, I'm passing to you to see what you would make of this. Are we ready to say that Canada should have a capital gains tax when you sell your home? And maybe not your first home, but if you have a second home, absolutely. And a third home, even higher. So should we change the tax policy when wealth transfers? Because that's one of the dilemmas we have. Lots of baby boomers who own 1, 2, 3 homes suddenly are now selling those things. And that should there be some kind of public reclaiming of some of those resources?
Zita, what do you think?
Well, I think if you want to start talking about changing the capital gains tax on primary residence, Mary, we're going to have to find you a new country, honey. That might be.
But it's in the U.S. In the U.S. you do, and in fact, because I'm an American citizen, if I were to sell my home, I will pay capital gains through my American taxes.
I know, that's exactly what I meant. But we want you to stay here. But I think that is a valid question that should always be front and center. The three things I would say, I don't know how we got to three things. I don't want to be less than the two of you. I think we need to get a grip on speculation in the housing market. I saw something the other day about Ontario, which said 25% of the homes that were bought in Ontario in the last 8 months of 2021 were speculators. I mean, defined as people who already had a home. And this takes many forms. In rural economies like Fogo Island, it takes the form of platforms like Airbnb. And so if a house goes on the market on Fogo Island, which doesn't happen very often, sometimes it's snapped up by somebody in Toronto before the people locally even know that there was a house for sale. And of course, the people selling the house are motivated to, a house in Fogo Island sells for, $100,000 to $150,000. So that's a livable one. That's gone like that. And so that just takes out supply. So I would say tax policy that really makes it expensive to speculate. And that then dampens the kind of enthusiasm that comes from the disproportionate growth of the financial economy. I think that the federal government as an economic actor needs to figure out how to deploy money across the country in smaller increments. Because most of the sort of programs that are developed for money to get behind building something don't work at the scale of small places. And maybe this exists, but, and did someone say that I know it's an annoying thing to say to people that the municipalities somehow are belong to the provinces? Is this the model of our country? But in every one of those 5,162 incorporated municipalities should have, if they don't have, and should be asked to have, a housing plan that takes them forward 20 years. And if you're going to make a housing plan, if you don't have one, the first place you got to start is, what does our economy going to look like? What do we want it to look like? And what kind of people and how many do we need? And where are they coming from? Where are they going to live? And I think with that plan, now we know what we have to figure out, where to find money for it and how to make it happen.
Okay, great points. And I'm going to go over to a question here from Maya. She's saying, I love what you were saying about exploring diverse models, especially those that don't always benefit the big corporations, but our planners favor big developments. How is the Urban Institute? So Mary, I'll throw this to you because you're mentioning there. How is the Urban Institute countering those powerful forces?
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, it's the old thing about transaction costs, and it's sort of rooted right into the economic development industrial complex that Zita's Shorefast work is trying to counter, which is that we somehow got into a mindset that it's much more efficient to approve large scale things. And it's back to Dominic Barton's fewer, better, rather than many. So I think part of it is that this is an old, you remember people that work in municipal government have often had careers there for 20 or 25 years, and they were trying to get approvals for larger subdivisions and larger projects. And I'm concerned now actually that the pressure on supply is going to continue to push the system in that direction, where we'll suddenly think that the only worthy kinds of things to do are these big, large scale things, which often don't work, right? So I think that's one of the sort of fundamental pieces that we have to kind of come to terms with, is that you want to have enough capacity in the financial system and in the approval system that you can still get at scale projects approved and efficiently approved. So that's why I think as of right, for certain limit sizes makes sense. It makes it much quicker. It doesn't get bogged down. And there are some parameters. I can see people in the chat who want to make sure that it's not an investor, and they want to make sure that it's, we just can't go too crazy about this. We can't start to say, well, it's got to look like this or it's got to look like that. So I think we have to be able to have a system that can approve things and finance things at scale, so that we can get. The dilemma we have now is that developers will tell you in the large centers, that's just not worth the headache to try to get a 6-unit thing to build. And so they'll say they get pushed in. The only thing they can do is a 30-story building on a particular lot next to a transit station, for instance, because it's the only thing that they can actually get approved. So that's where we've got to find a way. And it involves trust, guys. It involves trust, and it involves some risk, because you're fearful that you're going to get screwed. But we have to try to find a way to have the system open up in a way where there are guardrails in place, so that you avoid people getting screwed, and you at the same time find a way to flush more capital into the system so that there's more room for people to live in different kinds of circumstances.
Mm-hmm. What about, I know you're not financial planners, but what about our mortgage system? Is there anything innovative there?
Zita, thoughts?
Yeah, it depends on where you are. The challenge, as I said in rural earlier, is that we don't have access to mortgages. So that's
Interesting.
That's a problem. I think I don't think the mortgage system is the most important place to start. Having said that, except in rural places where we just have underinvestment, that I think that needs to be solved and can be solved. That's not the hardest problem. I wouldn't start there.
Well, that's great. So that's a good place to end then. Actually, I would like to, we're coming to the end. Actually, I could spend another hour, and I'm sure our audience could with all of you. We're coming up to the end. Does anybody want to offer some closing thoughts, closing comments? Mary, I'll start with you.
Well, I run a national institute, but I always defer to people thinking thoughtfully about what's within their own sort of sphere of control. So part of our sphere of control is to continue to advocate for cities that are welcoming to others and welcoming to different kinds of people, and for us to get really imaginative about how we look at where there's excess space and capacity in the system, land, empty bedrooms, whatever it is, and find ways to formalize that so that we can provide more choices. So I would encourage all of us to think about that, about what's within your own sphere of control and how can you advocate for that to be then adopted at different scales.
Okay. Zita?
Yeah, I think we got to be a country by being 5,162 communities. I think we need a mindset change, which is that the national economy needs to be the sum of all those economies. And all of the measures that we've been talking about, and we're just talking about housing, this applies to so many other subjects, we have to figure out practical local deployments for all those things. And that means develop strong local economies. So we're not walking on kelp at home while we read in the paper that the Canadian economy is doing just fine.
Okay, very good point. And Colin?
I agree with Zita 100%, being an economic developer myself. And the result of all this work means that I'm reminded of a quote of one of the families we just put in one of our homes. And the father said, now I can breathe. And that's the reason why we do this, is to figure out the solutions that allow families to thrive. And that's is the basis of a strong economy. If families are stable in their opportunities and able to look for long-term goals, and it's a whole approach, I know, but I just appreciate everyone's comments today and all the interaction on the from the participants, and we'll do our best to continue to answer all the questions. Thank you so much.
Well, you know, I actually hope the three of you will come back and join us if we invite you again, because I feel like we can go a lot deeper and a lot broader in this conversation. And I've certainly gotten a lot out of this. I want to thank you, Mary, Zita, and Colin, for being here today. We will be putting the video of this up shortly on ourrisingeconomy.ca and southislandprosperity.ca. So you'll be able to watch it and share it around, and I hope you do. Stay tuned. This is the first Ideas and Impact event. We'll be announcing another shortly. And on behalf of South Island Prosperity, thank you to all of the people out there in the audience who have joined today for Ideas and Impact. And stay tuned for more dates. Thank you all. Great discussion. Take care.
Thanks, Carrie.